Breaking news overnight, 16 years after murdering Bobby Joe Stinnett, Lisa Montgomery has been put to death. It happened after two different stays of execution were lifted over the past 24 hours. Montgomery is the first woman executed in the U.S. federal prison system in almost 70 years. Her lawyers argued that due to a debilitating mental illness brought on by years of physical and sexual abuse, she couldn't comprehend why she was to be executed.
Lisa Montgomery was executed by lethal injection at the federal prison in Terre Haute, Indiana, becoming the first woman executed by the federal government in nearly 70 years. The 52-year-old was put to death early Wednesday morning, shortly after the Supreme Court cleared the path for her execution. But before we discuss her final moments and the controversy surrounding her death, let's look at how a mentally ill woman became the center of one of the most debated executions in recent history. What really happened in her final hours, and what led her down such a dark path. The truth is more complicated and more haunting than anyone could have imagined. This is Criminal Tapes. Please like and subscribe to our channel to be the first to know about future executions that matter. In 2004, Montgomery committed a horrific crime that shocked the nation. She murdered a pregnant woman and cut her unborn baby from her womb. This brutal act landed her on federal death row, where she became the only woman awaiting execution by the federal government. For years, Montgomery was housed at a Texas prison designed for women with serious mental health needs. She received treatment for bipolar disorder and complex PTSD that stemmed from severe childhood abuse. Yet despite serious questions about her mental competency, the government moved forward with her execution, sparking intense legal battles right up until her final hours. It was December 2004 when Lisa Montgomery began planning what would become one of the most shocking crimes in American history. She had been struggling with severe mental illness and was living in a world of delusions. Montgomery believed she was pregnant, even though she wasn't. She had convinced her husband and others that she was expecting a baby, but as her supposed due date approached, Montgomery knew she needed to produce a child. That's when she turned to the internet and found her target. Bobby Joe Stinnett was a 23-year-old woman living in Skidmore, Missouri. She was 8 months pregnant and excited about becoming a mother. Bobby Joe bred dogs as a hobby and was active in online communities where dog lovers bought and sold puppies. She was known for being kind, trusting, and always willing to help other dog breeders. Montgomery discovered Bobby Joe through these online dog breeding forums. Using a fake name, she contacted Bobby Joe and pretended to be interested in buying a puppy. The two women exchanged messages for months, building what Bobby Joe thought was a friendship. Montgomery was careful and patient, slowly gaining Bobby Joe's trust. On December 16, 2004, Montgomery drove from her home in Kansas to Bobby Joe's house in Missouri. She told Bobby Joe she wanted to see the puppies in person before making a purchase. Bobby Joe, who had no reason to suspect danger, welcomed Montgomery into her home. What happened next was beyond horrific. Montgomery attacked the pregnant woman, strangling her with a rope. After Bobby Joe died, Montgomery used a kitchen knife to cut open her belly and remove the unborn baby. The baby girl was still alive. Montgomery cleaned up the scene and left with the infant, driving back to Kansas. She planned to pass the baby off as her own child, the one she had been claiming to be pregnant with for months. In her twisted mind, this would solve all her problems and make her lies become reality. To understand how Lisa Montgomery could commit such a horrific act, we need to look at the years of trauma that shaped her mind. Montgomery's childhood was a nightmare of abuse that would leave lasting scars on her mental health. From a young age, Montgomery suffered severe physical, sexual, and emotional abuse. Her stepfather regularly assaulted her, while her mother not only failed to protect her but often participated in the abuse. The trauma was so severe that it fundamentally changed how her brain developed. She learned to survive by creating alternate realities in her mind. As Montgomery grew older, the effects of this childhood trauma became more obvious. She was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, a condition that causes extreme mood swings between depression and mania. She also developed complex PTSD, a severe form of post-traumatic stress disorder that affects people who experience repeated trauma over long periods. These mental health conditions made it hard for Montgomery to tell the difference between reality and her own thoughts. She often lived in a world of delusions, believing things that weren't true. Her grip on reality became weaker as the years passed. In 2004, Montgomery's mental state reached a breaking point. She had suffered several miscarriages and was desperate to have another child. Her husband wanted a baby, and she felt enormous pressure to get pregnant. But when she couldn't conceive, something in her mind snapped. Montgomery began telling people she was pregnant. She convinced her husband, her family, and her friends that she was expecting a baby. She even went to baby showers and talked about her due date. In her mind, the pregnancy felt completely real. As the months passed, Montgomery's delusion grew stronger. She bought baby clothes, set up a nursery, and made detailed plans for her new child. She talked constantly about the baby she was carrying. Everyone around her believed she was pregnant because she seemed so convinced herself. But as her fake due date approached, Montgomery faced a terrible problem. She had promised everyone a baby, but there was no baby. Her delusion was about to be exposed, and she couldn't handle that reality. The pressure became unbearable. Montgomery's mental illness had created a situation where she felt she had no choice but to find a baby somewhere. Her damaged mind saw only one solution. She would take someone else's child and make it her own. This is when Montgomery began searching online for pregnant women. She wasn't looking for puppies anymore. She was hunting for her next victim. On December 16, 2004, Montgomery arrived at Bobby Joe Stinnett's home around noon. Bobby Joe's husband was at work, leaving her alone with Montgomery. The two women talked about dogs for a while, with Bobby Joe showing Montgomery around her home. Then Montgomery struck. She attacked Bobby Joe from behind, wrapping a rope around her neck. Bobby Joe fought for her life, but Montgomery was determined. The struggle was brief but violent. Within minutes, Bobby Joe was dead. What Montgomery did next was beyond comprehension. Using a kitchen knife, she cut open Bobby Joe's belly and removed the baby. The infant was still alive, breathing on her own. Montgomery wrapped the baby in blankets and cleaned up some of the blood. She then did something that showed how disconnected from reality she had become. Montgomery called her husband and told him she had given birth at a clinic in Kansas. She said the baby had come early and that she was bringing their new daughter home. Montgomery drove back to Kansas with the stolen baby, stopping at a restaurant along the way. She seemed calm and happy, as if nothing unusual had happened. In her mind, she had solved her problem. She now had the baby she had promised everyone. Meanwhile, back in Missouri, Bobby Joe's husband came home from work to find a scene of horror. His wife was dead, lying in a pool of blood. The baby they had been so excited to meet was gone. He immediately called 911 and police arrived within minutes. They found evidence of the brutal attack and realized this wasn't just a murder. Someone had taken Bobby Joe's unborn child. The search for the baby began immediately, with investigators knowing that every minute counted. Police knew they were racing against time to find the missing baby. They immediately began searching Bobby Joe's computer for clues about who might have done this terrible crime. What they found led them straight to Montgomery. Investigators discovered months of email exchanges between Bobby Joe and someone calling herself Darlene Fisher. The messages showed that this person had been planning to visit Bobby Joe on the day of the murder to look at puppies. The emails revealed a careful plan to gain Bobby Joe's trust over several months. Police traced the fake email address back to Montgomery's computer in Kansas. They also found that Montgomery had been researching how to perform cesarean sections online. Her internet search history painted a disturbing picture of someone planning exactly what had happened to Bobby Joe. Within hours of the murder, FBI agents were on their way to Montgomery's home in Melbourne, Kansas. They arrived to find Montgomery acting like a new mother, showing off her baby to friends and family. She had even taken the infant to a restaurant earlier that day, proudly telling people she had just given birth. When agents knocked on Montgomery's door, she answered while holding the baby. She seemed confused about why they were there. Montgomery insisted the child was hers and that she had given birth at a clinic in Kansas. But when investigators asked for medical records, she couldn't provide any. The baby was immediately taken to a hospital for examination. Doctors confirmed that the infant was healthy and matched the description of Bobby Joe's missing child. DNA tests later proved that this was indeed Bobby Joe's daughter. At first, Montgomery stuck to her story about giving birth. But as evidence mounted against her, she eventually broke down and confessed. She admitted to killing Bobby Joe and taking the baby. However, her confession was confused and rambling, showing signs of her severe mental illness. Forensic evidence at the crime scene supported Montgomery's confession. Her fingerprints were found in Bobby Joe's home, and blood evidence linked her to the murder. The rope used to strangle Bobby Joe was traced back to Montgomery. The baby, who was named Victoria Joe by her father, survived the horrific ordeal. She was returned to her family and grew up knowing the tragic story of how her mother died trying to protect her. The quick work of investigators had saved the infant's life and brought Montgomery to justice. To understand how Montgomery became capable of such violence, we must look at the horrific abuse she suffered throughout her childhood. Her story is one of the most extreme cases of child abuse that experts had ever documented. Montgomery was born in 1968, and her nightmare began early. Her biological father left when she was young, and her mother remarried a man who would become Montgomery's worst enemy. Her stepfather began sexually abusing her when she was just a small child. The abuse was violent, frequent, and continued for years. But Montgomery's mother, Judy Shaughnessy, didn't protect her daughter. Instead, she often helped with the abuse. Shaughnessy would hold Montgomery down while her stepfather assaulted her. She also invited other men to abuse her daughter, sometimes for money. Montgomery was essentially sold by her own mother to anyone willing to pay. The physical abuse was just as severe. Montgomery was beaten regularly, sometimes so badly that she couldn't go to school. She was burned with cigarettes, had her hair pulled out, and was tortured in ways that left permanent scars on her body and mind. Shaughnessy also used psychological torture on her daughter. She told Montgomery that she was worthless, that no one would ever love her, and that the abuse was her own fault. She forced Montgomery to watch as she killed the family's pets, teaching her daughter that violence was normal. As Montgomery grew up, she tried to escape through marriage, but her damaged mind led her to choose abusive partners. Her first husband was violent, and their relationship was filled with trauma. She had several children, but struggled to be a good mother because of her own mental health problems. Montgomery's second marriage was also troubled. She desperately wanted more children, but suffered multiple miscarriages and pregnancy losses. Each loss made her mental state worse. She began to believe that having a baby would fix all her problems and make her feel whole again. Throughout her adult life, Montgomery's mental health continued to decline. She was in and out of psychiatric hospitals and tried various medications, but nothing seemed to help for long. Her grip on reality became weaker as the years passed. The trauma from her childhood had literally changed Montgomery's brain. Experts later found that the severe abuse she suffered had damaged the parts of her brain responsible for decision-making and understanding right from wrong. She lived in a constant state of fear and confusion. By 2004, Montgomery was desperate for a baby. She had convinced herself and others that she was pregnant, but as her fake due date approached, she faced a crisis. Her mental illness had created a situation where she felt she had no choice but to take someone else's child. The years of abuse had created a person who could no longer tell the difference between reality and delusion. Montgomery's childhood had programmed her for violence and tragedy. Montgomery's trial began in 2007, and from the start, her mental health became the central issue. Her defense team argued that she was severely mentally ill and couldn't be held fully responsible for her actions. They brought in expert witnesses who explained how her childhood abuse had damaged her brain. Psychiatrists testified that Montgomery suffered from severe mental illness that made it impossible for her to understand reality. They said her brain had been so damaged by trauma that she couldn't tell right from wrong when she committed the crime. The defense argued that she should be found not guilty by reason of insanity. But prosecutors disagreed. They said that Montgomery knew what she was doing was wrong because she had planned the crime carefully. They pointed to her months of online communication with Bobby Joe and her internet searches about cesarean sections as proof that she understood her actions. The jury heard disturbing details about Montgomery's childhood abuse. Many people in the courtroom cried as experts described the torture she had endured, but despite the evidence of her mental illness, the jury found Montgomery guilty of kidnapping resulting in death. In October 2007, the same jury sentenced Montgomery to death. She became the only woman on federal death row, housed at a prison in Texas designed for inmates with serious mental health problems. For the next 13 years, Montgomery's lawyers filed appeal after appeal. They argued that executing someone with such severe mental illness violated the Constitution. The Eighth Amendment prohibits cruel and unusual punishment, and they said killing a mentally ill person was exactly that. At the Texas prison, Montgomery received treatment for bipolar disorder and complex PTSD. She was given medication and therapy to help manage her symptoms. Prison staff noted that she often seemed confused about where she was and what was happening to her. As her execution date approached in January 2021, Montgomery's legal team made desperate final attempts to save her life. They argued that she was in a state of psychosis and couldn't understand why she was being executed. A federal court agreed and granted her a temporary stay, less than 24 hours before her scheduled death. But the government quickly appealed the stay. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit overturned the decision, clearing the way for Montgomery's execution. Her lawyers tried to reach the Supreme Court, but time was running out. The legal battle continued right up until her final hours. Montgomery's case raised serious questions about whether the government should execute people with severe mental illness, but those questions wouldn't save her life. On her final day, Montgomery's lawyer, Amy Harwell, spent 4 hours with her at the prison. Montgomery seemed disconnected from reality, not fully understanding what was about to happen to her. Her spiritual advisor, John Francisco, came to visit. He had known Montgomery since she was a child, serving as her bus driver to church when she was 7 years old. During their visit, he showed Montgomery a tiny photograph she had given him decades earlier. On the back, it said, "Lisa, 7, 2nd grade." Montgomery gasped when she saw it. Francisco planned to sing "Jesus Loves Me" and "Amazing Grace" during the execution to comfort Montgomery, but when they arrived at the execution chamber, prison staff refused to let him stay with her. They said it was too late. Montgomery was already strapped to the gurney. Montgomery wiggled her fingers slightly, waving at her lawyers through the glass. She made eye contact with them as the lethal drugs began flowing through her veins. At 1:31 a.m. on January 13, 2021, Lisa Montgomery was pronounced dead. She was 52 years old. Montgomery did not speak any final words. She died without her spiritual advisor by her side, denied this final comfort in her last moments. Montgomery's execution raised difficult questions about justice and mental illness. Should someone with such severe psychological damage face the death penalty? Was justice truly served, or did the system fail a deeply damaged woman? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to us.